Well, here we are back here live, UFL College Draft recap Wednesday here. Thanks everyone for joining. Please like and subscribe. Trying to get up to 4,000 subscribers. We'll probably do a couple giveaways here when we hit 4,000. I know Dustin over at Royal Retros, so we'll get a couple of those custom jerseys. Whether you're a CFL fan, we can do XFL stuff, USFL stuff. I have my Marcast one, my XFL Dragons one. We will showcase big guest list standing by. I see Anthony just logged in as well. That was my bad. I'm like, where the heck is Anthony Miller? And then I had never actually sent over the link. So it's usually always my fault, which it is now. But this is exciting. Let me bring in everyone and then we'll do a little preface. We have Evan here, Greg Parks, Anthony Miller, everyone standing by. Fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice. I'm always so used to these drafts. Hey, it's happening at 7 a.m. and then we get a press release sometime in the afternoon. I go, there's no way today they're going to post this. We'll go live at 5. Everyone can have notes and everything, which we have. And then, of course, this all went out in a really timely manner here. Greg, I feel like we've lived through this many times. I know Evan and Anthony have as well, but this seemed to go pretty smooth today. Greg, introduce yourself and what do you think? Because like I said, normally this is something that comes in a press release. So it felt like they tried to make this be something today.
And yet it wasn't all that people wanted it to be either. There are people saying, why don't you televise this and things like that? It's like, no. So they released the picks on social media. Each team's social media account tweeted the picks out. So I think for what this draft is, and, we can get into the weeds a little bit and talk about what this draft is and what this draft is not. I think having it play out the way it did today, certainly it's better than dumping them all in a press release, which we've seen before. This is kind of the norm I'm expecting now. I think, Reed, you and I were on with Pat for the super dispersal draft back in January, and that's how they did it. We were on live and they were doing the picks in a very similar way on social media. Each team's account was releasing who they were picking, and that's how they did it today. So I think if there is a draft in the fall, I'm not sure there will be, but if there is, I think we could probably expect the announcements done the same way.
Yeah, this felt, and we'll get Evan in here because I thought we pre-show, I think Evan did a fantastic job of kind of explaining, because there's still a lot of questions. We're going to have Anthony here as well, and Anthony has this article I'm ready to pull up, and Greg as well, and Evan said he has notes, which is great because, again, normally I always try to go live, the draft's going to be at 10 a.m. Eastern, let's get on at 7, let's do it, and then we kind of sit around and pontificate for an hour, kind of waiting for the results to come in. This time they came in on time. Of course, we're late now, but now we're here. It's 5 o'clock. I was doing lawn work all day. I fell off a ladder. I put on a shirt, but I think I might have injured my elbow very poorly here, trying to shave one of the hedges outside. But we're here. And we have lots of things to talk about. Evan, for people in the chat, Philip's checking in, Abdul here, we'll pull up the comments. But Evan, can you explain the draft today? Because this very much is the USFL's college draft now with the UFL, right? Merge, kind of can you, Evan, what is going on here today for people checking in of what are we and how does this work?
Right. Well, a lot of the players that you saw today, it's not a guarantee that they play in the UFL. This is essentially a rights draft. The USFL, back when they were a separate entity, had one back in 2023, and they actually did theirs prior to the NFL draft, which was an interesting strategy because a lot of the players that were selected in that draft ended up signing NFL contracts or NFL draft picks, and they never appeared in the USFL. I would expect similar things here. A lot of the players that you saw that were drafted today are currently under contract in the NFL. A majority of them are undrafted free agents. I thought Houston's draft class in particular was interesting because I believe they only drafted 2 players that had signed into the NFL, and the rest of their class was current free agents. So that's an interesting strategy and one that might work out better for them considering the position they were in last year. But the idea is that, the chances of all 80 players that you saw taken today in the draft playing in the UFL in 2025 are slim to none. Hopefully there's some. My guess would be, I don't know, maybe a quarter. So 20 out of the 80. And I have notes on, I think, 20 or 21 guys today that I really want to touch on. Not saying that those are going to be the guys that actually come, but just to give, a better idea or understanding to people out there who are new to this process. Because Like I said, the USFL had a college draft. It was just like this at the beginning of 2023. And then last summer, the XFL had a ton of drafts, rookie drafts, supplemental drafts, things of that nature. And those were a similar process where they were all just acquiring rights, and not all those guys ended up actually playing in the league.
Because it is weird because obviously we have, and Mike Mitchell reported, and we have, coaches laid off here at the end of June. We're into the middle of July. A lot of the team kind of DPPs are involved in a lot of this stuff. If the coaches want to come out to do any of the showcases, they'll get paid for kind of that. But it's just like this weird time where we're acquiring new talent. We don't necessarily have like league scouts. We have a lot of DPPs that taking care of that. Like, Anthony, what do you make of all this? Because I'm sitting there like I'm a Commanders fan. Sam Hartman, right? Like our third string quarterback, like he's drafted in the league. Like, what do you make of all this? Because I don't think the league, and I know, pour one out to Jeff. Like Jeff with the VP of comms for the UFL, like he's gone. It just feels a little like they don't do a great job of explaining kind of what's going on here. Anthony, what do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get excited about these drafts sometimes because, like Evan said, like a lot of these guys are probably not going to end up in the UFL. A lot of them are in the NFL right now, and they're probably going to either get on the practice squad or be a third string on an NFL team. So, I mean, it does build some excitement because it has been pretty quiet. Like, I think there's only been 14 players that have signed to the NFL, so which is, lower than what we're usually, seeing. And then usually, like around this time last offseason, there were teams that were signing players, like they were signing free agents and stuff. We have not seen that at all. This is really the first time where we've talked about, like teams like, I guess, acquiring the rights of a player, but they're not really getting them unless they like commit to it. So it's been a fairly quiet offseason, and hopefully a lot of these guys will be able to join the UFL. I think it'd be a great thing. There's a lot of good talent that's coming out of this draft, but it's just, these drafts sometimes can be kind of anticlimactic, and I think that's why they don't put it on television and stuff like that, because it's like you're only getting the rights to these players. That's why like the CFL never does anything with their like negotiation lists and stuff like that, because I mean, we don't even know if these players are going to play or not.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great way to kind of look at it, because you get a lot of this. I've seen players like they've been selected and they tweet like, okay, what's going on? This is fake. Like, it's not fake. It really is like the negotiations list. I think Anthony is correct. The best way to kind of phrase this, where if you your opportunity in the NFL doesn't work out, if you choose to play in the NFL, this is the team that kind of has your rights. I think that's a good way to look at it. I would never like to see this televised, because I just don't think that, Evan, like everyone here has a wealth of knowledge of these players. Like, I don't think the casual person coming on would know like a deep dive into a lot of the names that are involved in this. I think it's good that we had some time to kind of work through that. I wanted to read, and then we'll get to kind of Greg's initial thoughts into kind of the players that were drafted. So just I'm covering myself here to kind of read my press release here. So this came out on July 11th, talking about the draft. The UFL, will hold the college draft today. They'll select from over 12,000 draft eligible players. Players must be eligible to have been selected in the 2024 NFL draft and were not selected. UFL teams will hold exclusive rights to those players they select until players reports to the team or the team gives up their rights. All players eligible for the draft must have been out of high school for at least 3 years and exhausted or waived their college eligibility. All players who sign the UFL contract, including players who remain under contract from the 2024 season, will have an NFL out until December 31st. So now that we've gotten all that, Greg, like initial thoughts today, like how did the teams do? And I have your article here. We can pull up if there's anything specific, but what was your general takeaways?
It really is hard to analyze a draft of this type because so many of these players are never going to step foot on a UFL field. So you can't apply the usual analyzation techniques that you would to an NFL draft or to an NBA draft. So I mean, if you want to look at the draft as far as pure talent, I mean, you can do that and you can say what team drafted the most talent, but it's very hard to look at it and say, oh, so-and-so filled their need. They drafted 2 or 3 offensive linemen, because those offensive linemen probably are under NFL contract, probably will either make the team or make the practice squad. So I really struggle with how to analyze and assess a draft of this nature. It is kind of an amalgam of the USFL college draft from last year, the XFL rookie draft in terms of the timing, and then the CFL rights draft, or the negotiation list, which you guys mentioned. And it makes sense because there are representatives from all three leagues. Jim Pop, who's been in the CFL front offices, Doug Whaley, who was with the XFL, and of course Moose Johnston with the USFL. They're all a part of the UFL. So it does kind of feel like they've taken a little bit from each league's draft and put it into this. So it is hard. And I think the other thing that's hard about it too is if you get to the end of the NFL season, let's take a player, Keaton Slovis, quarterback out of BYU, for example. He was drafted by DC. Let's say he spends the NFL season on a practice squad. End of the year, he gets offered a futures contract by an NFL team. If you're the UFL, naturally, you want him to choose playing in your league over signing that futures contract. But really, what can you offer? Because what we've learned about the UFL is that, at least publicly, they're not paying players over and above other players. Their salaries are the same. Whether or not that's true, we don't know, but this is not a league based on what we've seen and how it spends money that's going to spend a lot of money and compete and say, yeah, you can make this much in an NFL futures deal, but we'll pay you X plus to be in our league, right? And you can't even offer opportunity. In years past, you could say, well, you can sign a futures deal, but you can also come and play in our league, show out, and then sign with an NFL team in the summer and maybe better positioned with that NFL team going into training camp. I mean, you look at the numbers, 14 players at this point have signed into the NFL. That's not a lot, and no quarterbacks. So you can offer the opportunity to play and risk injury in the spring. Yeah. But you can't even say, look at the past, look at our numbers, look at the number of players we've put in the NFL if you just take advantage of this opportunity. The league MVP, we're on the eve of training camp. Some training camps have already started, and the league MVP, Adrian Martinez, best quarterback in the league, hasn't signed with an NFL team. Now, I expect him to, but you can take a futures deal, and you can be with that team's playbook during the offseason, and you can go through mini camps and OTAs and give yourself a chance to compete there and then go into training camp with a leg up. Or you can play in the UFL, get signed by a team, best case scenario, get signed by a team whose playbook you're not familiar with, going into camp behind other players who've been in mini camps and who have been through OTAs and who have studied the playbook, even rookies and UDFAs at that point. So I don't really even see a selling point for the UFL for these guys, these fringe guys who might be considering signing futures contracts next January versus playing in the UFL.
Well, and I know that last year when it was the XFL did it was the rookie draft, right? It wasn't the college draft, it was the rookie draft. And they had said like, well, this is for players that maybe missed out and don't have an opportunity. Anthony, I saw you nodding your head. Thoughts on that? Then we'll toss to Evan, and then we'll actually talk some players here and teams to kind of stand out. But I do think it's important to just like contextualize what's going on here. Anthony, thoughts on anything Greg said and just kind of the purpose of this draft, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I get why they do these drafts. Like one, I think it brings some news to the league. Like you can see. I mean, if you look these players up on Google, like the first article is going to pop up is, hey, they were drafted by the UFL. Like that's good. I mean, it may be, I don't want to say it's fake publicity, but it's good. Any publicity is good publicity, right? Like the UFL is going to be on people's radars today. Like, I think Greg just had it on the article was 65 players are under NFL contracts. So who knows if most of them are probably going to end up being in the NFL, but at least that's good exposure for the UFL to, they have their names next to the players. Now, I mean, again, are they going to sign them? Probably not. But, again, good, any kind of publicity the league can get is important, especially with it being a very quiet off season where I'm not going to lie, it's been, Mike and I have really struggled to write articles for Sports Illustrated because we're trying to figure out what to write because there's just not a lot of news going on right now. Not a lot of players getting signed, even though 2 have signed this week, which has been at least good for the league. At least they're making progress there, but it's been very quiet. Like no players have been signed. It's just been a very dead off season. So at least this gives us something to talk about. There have been good players that have come out of these rookie college drafts that have ended up, either doing well in the UFL this year or have done well in the NFL or the CFL. So at least there's been talent that's come out of it, and there's been some good stories from it. There's not going to be many, but there's hopefully there's going to be some players out of this that end up being stars in the league next year. And the one thing I was really interested in with Greg's article is talking about only 8 players that were not FBS related, which is really interesting because I think the league should try to push for more like of those smaller school guys because there's a lot of talent in FCS and Division 2 and Division 3 that are being overlooked and not really getting those opportunities. They may get more opportunities in the European League of Football or the indoor football leagues and something like that, but they really should try to get some of these guys that are from these smaller schools because I think that I think the league should try to get players that are going to stay in the league for a long time. And I think those guys are more likely to, maybe become stars and be, household names within the league in the next few years, other than these guys that are from like these big Division I schools like Georgia and Alabama, because they're more likely going to go to the NFL, or if they don't see a future in the UFL, they'll just retire.
Yeah, I don't really know what spurned this week, of any week, to kind of do this. I know there's been a lot of talk about that. I was talking with producer Max, like, I don't know if the week that the college football game came out, I don't play a lot of video games and college video games, but I know that there's a lot of like communication with a lot of that stuff going on. Like, I know that is the week to kind of try to draw some football attention. I will just say, in Anthony, in regards to just kind of, it really has been a quiet off season. And I would just say, like, and I know that we're moving through comm directors here with the UFL, but like, I know the CFL reached out to Anthony and said, hey, we have a lot of rookies coming in, trying out, running combines. Would you like to interview them? Anthony did a series of articles about that. Like, shoot, I would pay if anyone like, hey, Reed, we're doing St. Louis, come out, we'll give you some interviews. I'd pay to go out there, like, or do it on Zoom for free. Like, it has been very quiet. I mean, we're doing the money recaps that Jason Hussey and I for the CFL, but it has been quiet. It has been quiet. Not a lot of that. Evan, any other thoughts on this and the place this stands? And then we'll get into kind of teams here. I got Anthony's article we can pull up as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything Greg and Anthony have already said is right. I would add that, in terms of timing, right? I mean, you talked about the NCAA game coming out, but I also think with the UFL, starting to do some of these showcases, I think they've done St. Louis and DC already. With them kind of ramping those up, it's kind of time to get more into a player-focused mindset. That's what they're trying to focus on. They are really trying to get the ball rolling on what has been a very quiet offseason in the past. I guess it's already been a month since we had the championship game. And then, yeah, I really like what Anthony said about, drafting more small school players, which are FCS and below. I'm going to make sure to touch on a lot of those guys today because that's what I have. That's who I have a lot of in my notes. That's who I focus on. That's what I know. And Anthony's totally right. Those are the guys who are going to, more than likely play in your league because those guys aren't getting the same number of NFL opportunities, especially like HBCU players. I don't think there was any of those guys drafted this year, and they fall into the FCS and Division II categories. So maybe keep pushing that. Like I remember the XFL, I guess it was in 2022, had the HBCU showcase in Jackson State when Deion Sanders was the head coach there. So just keep doing things like that, and I mean, it's good to see that we're getting more players involved. At least, again, there's probably only a quarter of these guys or a little more that are going to end up in this league next year, but it's better than nothing in my opinion. So.
Yeah, and again, we're doing this, and we're still doing the showcases. We're going to have a draft later. Abdul had a question about that here, talking about, is there still going to be more drafts? Greg said, we presume there's going to be. Anthony, let's start with you. I have your article here, big takeaways, and, we can do a little team. We're not going to do every player here, and again, some of these is, what result, diminishing results of kind of going through every single one of these. Some of the guys lesser known. Anthony, what are standouts for you? And then we can kind of start going team by team here.
Well, I want to start with everyone's been complaining about LeBron James and Bronny James in that situation, how he got drafted, and then no one's talking about how Drake Stoops got drafted by Bob Stoops in here. But no, in all seriousness, I think the big takeaway is the big takeaway from this draft is offensive line. I mean, that was obviously a very big position. I think the tackle position had the most from any position. I think 12 total got picked. So it's very apparent. And I know I know I've talked about this before, like the number one position that's always a struggle for spring football leagues to find is good offensive linemen. And I think that's what's good about these college and rookie drafts is that you can get young offensive linemen that maybe still need some development and probably won't play in the NFL. They can develop in the UFL and be able to get better and then maybe move on to the NFL. So it was very clear offensive line was a big factor for a lot of teams today. I will say, looking at the quarterback positions, a lot of mobile quarterbacks, which I think is always a really smart way to go, just because, again, offensive linemen are not the strongest. They need a lot of development. So you need a quarterback who can be mobile and roll out of the pocket and be able to throw on the run. So I would say my biggest takeaways was, big emphasis on offensive linemen, drafting is, I think 12 tackles, and then I love how the quarterbacks, it's all mobile quarterbacks, which I think is a really important thing for these spring football leagues to have those young quarterbacks who, they have strong arms, they give them the run, but maybe there's some development they need there. So those were my takeaways from the draft.
Greg, I'll put your article, like Anthony said, a lot of quarterbacks taken, right? The number first one off the board, draft, kind of major takeaways for you here in terms of the actual players selected.
Absolutely, quarterbacks. 3 quarterbacks going in the first round, and not necessarily teams that you would expect. Memphis, we talked about a lot of holes on that Memphis team, right? They take a quarterback number 1 overall, and they don't take an offensive lineman, which was their Achilles heel on offense until the 6th round. So I thought that was interesting. You look at Arlington, they take a quarterback in the first round. Of all the teams, you would think that Arlington was the most set. If Luis Perez comes back, the numbers he put up, the performance he put up in 2024, and even if he doesn't come back, you've got 2 really strong young players behind him in Lindsey Scott and Holton Ahlers, and yet they take a quarterback. You look at Houston, probably one of the most quarterback needy teams, and they don't take a quarterback. DC takes 2 quarterbacks, so it makes you wonder what's going on there. St. Louis, I had them in my mock draft taking a quarterback in the first round, just kind of, AJ McCarron getting older, don't know if he's going to come back. I don't think they have the backups behind him that Arlington does that you could plug in if McCarron doesn't come back as starter. So they take Siobhan Cordero there. San Antonio doesn't take a quarterback. You would think somebody like AJ Smith would always be wanting to take a quarterback every year just to have somebody to develop in that offense, but they don't. And, Michigan takes a quarterback. Birmingham takes a flyer on Sam Hartman late, who, your Commanders, he may end up making the 53-man roster of the Washington Commanders, let alone the practice squad. So explains why he went in the 9th round here, perhaps. But quarterback, very interesting to see, as Anthony talked about, what quarterbacks went, what their skill sets were, and where they went.
Evan, I know this is a tough question for you, and I apologize. Obviously, you're involved in player scouting and everything getting signed on here. We've just spent here the first, 20 minutes talking about how this draft, kind of doesn't matter, kind of matters, but kind of doesn't. How would you approach if you're one of these teams? Because it's not like, well, this guy's guaranteed, right? We can draft 80, across the board, but 80 players, it doesn't hurt us, right? I mean, we're just having the rights if they want to come. How would you approach this if you were someone involved in one of these teams? And I guess we'll go from there.
Yeah, well, you're picking from a pool of undrafted players, right? So you want NFL caliber guys, guys that are signed to NFL teams, because it's not written in the rules, right? You're going to take guys that are signed to NFL contracts because those are typically the best players, even if they're not also technically available, which I understand that's all complicated. But if I was, in a position, doing a draft like this that was for rights and you had to kind of pick from a pool of NFL guys, I would, use my existing connections in the NFL with NFL teams to figure out, which guys of your undrafted pool, I'm not talking about your draft class, but your undrafted pool that you brought in after the draft, what what guys are going to be on the fringe is essentially what I'm trying to say. You know, what guys do you think are, you know, they don't have the greatest chances of making the 53? Maybe they're cut in the preseason as opposed to, you know, being a part of the final round of cuts or whatever. Just kind of making those, you know, very small, I guess, changes of note, you know, just to determine what kind of, you know, pool you have.
So let's go here. Let's go team by team. I thought I had. Here we go. Anthony first, since you're the Arlington Renegades fan here, or not fan, you're the reporter. Right? Sorry. Standouts here. I know we talked. You made the joke, Bob Stoops done all that. Like thoughts here, Arlington Renegades. Any players of note? We'll kind of go around the horn here for each of these teams, kind of as we go through.
I make the joke about Drake Stoops, but I actually do think that's a pretty solid pick. Like I think he's somebody who can actually come in and be that slot receiver for the Renegades, and you know he has that chemistry, having been, you know, obviously he's very close to his dad, so he knows, you know, the type of offense he wants to run. He knows how he works as a coach. So I actually think that's a really solid pick to get him in the 10th round. And I think Stoops is somebody, you know, if Drake doesn't, you know, if the NFL doesn't work out, he would definitely go to the UFL and join him. Obviously, Plumlee is the big name here going in the first round. I actually don't mind the pick. I think, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty with Luis Perez if he is going to come back. But I think, you know, if Plumlee comes in, I think he's going to end up being the third quarterback on this team. I still think Lindsey Scott just has better traits and better skill sets than Plumlee has. Plumlee, it has a tendency of turning the ball over a lot, and I think that's something that he, you know, really needed to clean up when he was in college, and what he'll need to work on when he goes into the pros. So I still think Lindsey Scott Jr., I don't think he'll be a threat to him. I think Lindsey still ends up being on top of him in terms of the depth chart. So I think it will be really, can Plumlee beat out Holton for that third string quarterback job? But I like Plumlee. I mean, he's got all the skill sets that you want. He's got a good arm. He's obviously very mobile. So he's fast. When he's out in the open field, he can put on the burners. So I really liked seeing that. Offensive line, I think the offensive line was kind of shaky for Arlington at the beginning of the year. It got better throughout the season, but I think adding 3 guys on the offensive line is really important there. So I like that they kind of focus on the offensive line. You know, defensively, I would have liked them to actually done something in the secondary. I think, you know, they got a good group of linebackers. You know, they got some defensive linemen, but I think the like corner and safety was where, well, I wouldn't say safety. I would say corner was their weakest spot throughout the team. And I wish they would have drafted some more corners. I wish they would have kind of built that up a little bit more because I think it was really lacking. This was a team that allowed a lot of big plays in that secondary. So I would have liked to have seen more corners picked, but I think overall it was it was a solid draft for the team.
Coach Craig here checking in, co-signing a lot of what you're saying about Plumlee, talking about he played baseball. So we should have Coach Craig, like we did. This was kind of like, hey, we're doing this. And I like, we all work hard here, but kind of like, what effort can we do to put in? So we need to get Coach Craig on again here to talk through all that stuff. Greg, any standout players from here? We'll rotate around, and then we'll go to Evan.
What stands out to me about Arlington is the linebackers. They chose 3 linebackers. I had them choosing a linebacker in my mock draft. I thought linebacker was a bit of a weakness on defense for them, especially in pass coverage over the middle. Yeah, their linebackers are getting older. Donald Payne in the middle. So they've really infuse some youth into the second line of defense there. Kalen DeLoach, kind of a linebacker safety hybrid. People talk about him being like miscast maybe as a linebacker, better suited for strong safety given his size. So he's an interesting pick there. Amari Gaynor out of UNC, Bo Richter out of the Air Force. So I think they did need to replenish and add some youth to the linebacker core, get some guys who can maybe cover over the middle a little better. I mean, we saw so many plays that were just routes over the middle, easy routes for quarterbacks and for receivers. And that was what Arlington was burned by quite a bit. So 3 linebackers in this draft really stood out to me for them.
Evan, for you?
Yeah, I mean, Drake Stoops, I think, is obviously the one that a lot of people were talking about, because Bob Stoops is the head coach and, he's drafting his son. To me, this doesn't really confirm that he's coming back next year. Or, it doesn't really change much for me because right now Drake Stoops is in the NFL with the Los Angeles Rams. And it's worth noting that he had, a huge senior season or, final season, maybe 5th year compared to the rest of, his production during his time at Oklahoma. So I won't focus too much on him. The guy I really want to talk about is Griffin McDowell, the tackle out of Chattanooga. This is a guy interviewed during the pre-draft process last year. Transferred down to the FCS level for his last season. He played 5 seasons at the University of Florida. Has a wealth of experience at numerous positions. Not only did he play offensive line, but he played defensive line, tight end, special teams. So he was a bit on the slimmer side, kind of 285 pounds. Not exactly what you'd want to see for a tackle, but when he went down to the FCS level, put on some weight, got back up to 300, was able to start, turned into a very good performer there. Signed with the Kansas City Chiefs as an undrafted free agent, likely projects more as a guard at the next level, again, just given his size and kind of his skill set. But that's an interesting one that I don't think is going to get talked about enough. And then John Reese Plumlee. I was going to talk about all of the first-round quarterbacks in one go, so I guess I'll just do that now. There were 3 quarterbacks taken in the first round. Obviously, we've got John Reese Plumlee here, quarterback out of UCF. Chavon Cordero, quarterback out of San Jose State, previously at Hawaii, was selected by the Battlehawks. And then Jason Bean, the quarterback from Kansas, previously played at North Texas and was drafted by the Showboats. So all of these guys are mobile. I thought that was an interesting trend. I mean, we talk about just in draft circles in any league, mobile quarterbacks becoming more important. The previous NFL MVP was Lamar Jackson, and I know maybe that wasn't the most deserving MVP ever, but the idea is that, mobile quarterbacks are, starting to become more valuable. You look at what Jalen Hurts has done with the Eagles, things like that. So they're all mobile guys, so I like that. Worth noting that Cordero is the only one of the 3 that's not currently signed to the NFL. He was previously with the Seahawks, let go. So that's something to note in terms of, odds of the guy actually coming to the league. And then if I had to pick, the most upside out of those 3, I'd probably pick Jason Bean from Kansas, just because I think he has the most Power 5 starting experience. I've actually seen John Reese Plumlee throw around. I was standing right next to him, watching him go through progressions and drills when I scouted at Tulane in the AAC championship game in 2022 against UCF. So I've, got a pretty up close and personal look at him. He's a guy I could see coming to this league. I think it would be beneficial for him, just because I don't know if he's fully ready for the NFL yet, just given where he came from and just some of the tools that he has. But all 3 are very intriguing options. And, again, I guess it's nice to see 3 quarterbacks all kind of, that fit the more modern standard being taken in the first round of this draft today.
Anthony, last question for you about the Renegades here. Obviously, we joked the Stoops and Drake and all that. I don't know. Yeah, confirmation, Stoops. I guess we're all set now, right? Are we operating? And then Greg can co-sign as well if he wants. But obviously, these are the 8 teams. Stoops back. Are we? I think at this point we would know if anything is shaken out. Do you feel differently about that?
I mean, we asked Stoops in that last media availability for the Renegades last week of the season, do you want to come back, or what's your future look like? And he said I want to come back. I think the only thing that's going to hold him back, I think, is going to be the financial. I don't think he does. I don't know if he's exactly said financial, but he's there's going to be uncertainty after the contracts are released. That I think the financial part is probably going to play a factor in it, but I think he has every desire to come back. I think he's enjoying it. He doesn't have to, he always talks about he doesn't have to go to the grind of what college is like and going out and scouting and worrying about, are the kids going to class and stuff like that. He doesn't want to worry about that kind of stuff. He wants to work with professionals and he wants to have a shorter schedule. So it makes sense for him because he'll have his time off in the fall and stuff like that to spend time with his family. And then in the spring, just, 3 months go coach the, in the UFL. So the schedule fits him and he seems to still have a passion for it. And so I think there's still a chance he comes back. It's really just going to depend on what is the UFL going to offer these coaches for 2025 and beyond in terms of salary. Because if it's not going to be a lot, then maybe he doesn't. Maybe it makes no sense for him. But I mean, Arlington's a good location for, where him and his family is, because they're around the area, sort of, in Oklahoma and stuff like that. So I think I'm under the assumption he's going to come back unless it's something, drastic financially that the UFL offers.
Greg, any thoughts on that? I know I saw someone comment today, that means there's no expansion, but 8 teams, we're moving forward, and then we'll move on to Birmingham after that. So any thoughts on that? And then we can segue into kind of thoughts about the Stallions.
You're not going to trick me into talking about expansion on this show, Reed. Don't even think about it. So, no, I agree with Anthony. I think, it's really unfortunate the situation that the head coaches find themselves in through no fault of their own. I think Bob Stoops is good for the league, and so I hope that they're able to agree on a contract and he's able to return.
So let's get in here to the Stallions. You know, the rich get richer here. Obviously, I want to make sure I have the right thing here to bring up. Obviously, you know, we're in St. Louis and all that. Greg, thoughts on anyone stand out that the Stallions brought on?
Well, they were in a unique position, very different than I think a lot of the teams in this league, in that they didn't have any glaring weaknesses or holes positionally that they needed to look to fill here in this draft. So they could really kind of sit back and take the best players available that fit their scheme. And so, you know, you look at the first 2 picks, offensive lineman Frank Crum from Wyoming. You know, I think he was at the NFL Combine. Some people had draftable grades on him in terms of the NFL draft. Imani Bailey is an interesting pick out of TCU, a running back. You know, the 4 offensive linemen, Sam Hartman. I mean, you know, Birmingham is different also because if you're a player who's on, I used the example of Keaton Slovis earlier in the show, and if you're a player who's kind of on the fringe of signing a futures contract, and then you're looking at the UFL prospects and you're like, yeah, do I really want to go in there? I mean, if somebody has their rights owned by Birmingham, they might want to take that risk. I mean, Birmingham playing for Skip Holtz, you're going to put up numbers. You're going to be part of a successful team. So I don't know how much that plays a part in people's thinking when it comes to these spring leagues, whether it's just they look at the league overall and what can this league do for me, or they look at a team and say, well, Birmingham owns my rights. I know they're a really good team. I know Skip Holtz is a really good offensive coach. I'm an offensive player who wants to improve that certain parts of my game, and I know that he can do that. Maybe I will take this jump where if it was the Houston Roughnecks, they might not have. So when you're looking at that aspect of it, from a player acquisition point of view, some of these guys may find Birmingham more attractive than if they were drafted by another team.
Yeah, I want someone to pull like a Caleb Williams. Yeah, I'm not going to the showboats here. Like, I really would prefer to go to some of these. Evan, standout players from this part here as we go through?
Yeah, I've got 2 of them. I mean, the first one is kind of the elephant in the room to a degree, and that's obviously Sam Hartman, the quarterback from Notre Dame. Probably one of the bigger college quarterbacks that a lot of people have watched in recent years. Spent several seasons at Wake Forest and then transferred to Notre Dame for his final season. I think, the pick has garnered the most media attention just because Birmingham has a track record of, developing quarterbacks really well, especially this past year, not only with, the league MVP, Adrian Martinez, who came out of Kansas State and signed with the Detroit Lions and then eventually ended up with Birmingham, but also Matt Corral. I'd give them credit for getting him in there and kind of, I guess, in a sense, saving his career. It looked like he was never going to play football again with everything that happened between him and Carolina and him in New England. So Sam Hartman, threw for over 4,000 yards and almost 40 touchdowns in 2021 at Wake Forest, transferred to Notre Dame for last season and had the highest quarterback rating of his career. It was about the same. It was just like a tick over what it was in 2022 at Wake Forest, and that's according to ESPN. And then, like you said, Reed, he's currently signed with the Washington Commanders, and I don't know, he's a guy that I think, does actually have a decent chance of making it on the 53, or at least being a practice squad player and sticking around in the NFL. So I don't know if he comes to the Stallions. I don't know if that's in his best interest, but if he does, I think, that would turn a lot of heads. And, I think he would play really well in this league just based off the college tape.
Yeah, and I don't know, like, it's weird because obviously I'm a Commanders fan and Jane Daniels and all that, but, like, there's been a ton of, like, for basically being because we have Mariota, like, for being the 3rd string, 4th string quarterback, like, there's been a ton of pub coming from, obviously the Commanders, and then you get all the aggregators, whatever. Like, I don't know if it's just because he's, like, good looking. Like I think Mike Mitchell said he kind of looks like Pat Ruffino with longer hair. Like, I've just seen this ton of him. Like, I'm a Commanders fan. I don't know if I'm a Commanders fan enough to know, like, who's the 4th string quarterback or who's kind of on the fringe to come on. I'm like, oh yeah, Sam. Like, I know, like, I'm aware of that. So it's just weird to me that, and obviously kind of being the notable name there. Anthony, thoughts on Sam or anyone else here coming out from the Stallions?
Yeah, I think Sam Hartman's an interesting choice. I wouldn't compare him to like the skill set that guys like Alex Magoo and Adrian Martinez had at the quarterback position. I would say he may be a little bit more of a pocket quarterback. He may be a little more like a J. Morris Smith type, but I think he could be somebody that could develop, in the UFL. I don't ever see him wearing a Stallions jersey personally. Maybe a couple years down the road, I can definitely see him, making the Washington Commanders team as a third string quarterback. So, I mean, unfortunately, I don't think we're ever going to see him in that. The two guys that pointed out to me was Amani Bailey, he had a really good season last year for TCU, over 1,200 yards rushing. Not the fastest guy, but I think he actually fits the Stallions' offensive system really well. This is a team that wants to be able to run the football. You don't need to be a fast running back to be in that backfield for the Stallions. So I actually think Bailey is actually a pretty good fit for what they want to do. So if he does end up playing for them, I think he could succeed in that system. And then Jeffco for Arkansas, I like him as well. I think he kind of got buried under depth charts when he was at like Missouri and Arkansas, but he's had some really nice moments. I think he's a good pass rusher. I think he could, even play hybrid outside linebacker as well. I think he's got that talent to do it. So those are the two that I really like. I think Bailey, if he can get into this offense for Birmingham, if he ends up going to the UFL, I think he can maybe be that number one running back that. I know they're a running back by committee team, but maybe he could be that replacement for Bo Scarborough.
Evan, you want to move on here? We want to talk defenders, and we'll circle back to Greg here. I think he said two quarterbacks.
I actually had one more player for the Stallions.
Yeah, go for it.
Just real quick. Dallin Holker, the tight end from Colorado State. He gained a lot of attention when Colorado State played Colorado. I'm sure a lot of people remember that game, kind of chippy. I think that was the game Travis Hunter got injured. But this guy, Dallin Holker, he had 6 catches for 109 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game. And then he finished the season as a first-team All-Mountain West and second-team All-American performer. He's currently signed with the New Orleans Saints. Just because, he's a group of 5 guy, I wanted to give him a shout out. But again, we talked about in terms of, odds of guys actually coming into this league and doing something. He's a guy that, I could see just, I could see him in a Stallions uniform, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, good. I appreciate that. All right, let's keep with you here. Let's go to defenders, and then we'll circle around again here. Like I said, I think Greg had talked a couple quarterbacks taken. Thoughts what the defenders did?
Yeah, I have 4 players to talk about with the defenders, and 2 of them are the quarterbacks, so I'll start with that. Keaton Slovis is the first one. I know Greg's already mentioned his name a couple times. Breakout first year at USC in 2019. I mean, he looked like he was going to be the future of that program and get them back on track, kind of like, what Caleb Williams ended up doing. Breakout year in 2019, and then just never was able to capture that same energy. He played decently at USC for the 2 seasons that followed, but could never really get it together, and then transferred to Pitt, had an okay season there, transferred to BYU, had an okay season there. So kind of dropped off a bit, but I can definitely see him as a project guy, somebody that could develop. And obviously I think that's why he wasn't one of the first quarterbacks taken in this draft. He wasn't a first-round pick. Interestingly enough, he's currently in training camp along with Jason Bean, who was the number 1 overall pick with the Indianapolis Colts. Jason Bean going to the Showboats, of course, in the first round. And then Tanner Mordecai, the quarterback from Wisconsin. He started his career at Oklahoma, but he was obviously much more remembered for his time at SMU in 2021 and 2022. He had a combined 7,152 passing yards and 72 touchdowns over those 2 seasons combined. Was good enough to, transfer up back to the Power 5 level, which wasn't much of a surprise. Went to Wisconsin, which was kind of an interesting decision, but had a down year there, only threw for 9 touchdowns. But just because of what he did at SMU, that was enough for a team to want to bring him in. The San Francisco 49ers signed him as an undrafted free agent. So, I don't know if either of those guys are going to come. I mean, I think if they were to come to DC, if both of them came, they'd be probably competing for a backup job. And then the other 2 guys I wanted to talk about real quick, Garrett Greenfield, the offensive tackle from South Dakota State. He's not the only South Dakota State guy I'm going to talk about in this draft because they took a lot of them. He's a 3-time FCS All-American. That unit was one of the best, that I've seen in a hot minute. North Dakota State has a lot of NFL ready linemen too, but South Dakota State as well, who just won the FCS championship. I think that's why they had a lot of draft picks. But one of his teammates, Garrett, Mason McCormick, was actually drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers in the 4th round. And then Greenfield is currently with the Seattle Seahawks, who signed him as an undrafted free agent. So maybe somebody to watch. Again, you just talk about high upside guy, coming out of a small school, maybe something there. The last guy I'll talk about for DC, Dallas Gant, the linebacker from Toledo, started his career at Ohio State, played 3 or 4 seasons there, didn't really do a lot, didn't get on the field much. Then he turned up at Toledo in 22 and exploded, had 233 tackles over the past 2 seasons combined, added 14.5 tackles for loss and 8 passes defended. It's interesting because his 2 seasons at Toledo were almost identical. I think he had like 1 more tackle this past season than he did in 22. Anyways, he was a 2-time first-team All-MAC performer, and the Minnesota Vikings signed him as a UDFA. What was interesting, too, a number of guys I noticed, I think the Vikings and the Raiders were taken in terms of, like I said, teams. The NFL teams, have these guys as UDFAs. When I was looking around, I noticed there was a lot of Raider guys and a lot of Vikings guys that seem to be in this draft. So, again, maybe some, pre-existing connections there between personnel people. I don't know, but just something else to note.
Greg, circle to you here. Thoughts on the defenders?
Yeah, I'm looking at my list right now, and I think the Vikings stood out to me, too, as a team that I think 6 of their undrafted free agents were drafted by the UFL today. So that was a team definitely that, as I was noting them as the draft was going on, that stuck in my head. If you're looking at from a pure talent standpoint, I think DC might have had the best draft up and down this list. I think this may be the most talented draft class, which isn't always the best thing, because if it's the most talented, it's probably the least likely to get these guys into the UFL. So it's kind of a double-edged sword for DC there. I thought that Michael Wiley, I liked running back out of Arizona, I thought was a nice pick. I think Slovis has a starter ceiling in a league like the UFL. So bringing him in would be interesting. I will say about Tanner Mordecai, he comes from a spread system in SMU. And as Evan mentioned, he had a down year at Wisconsin. Part of that was they were transitioning first year under Luke Fickell and offensive coordinator Phil Longo. They were transitioning from traditional Wisconsin power football to the spread offense. And I don't think you could make a bigger transition in 1 year than that. So I think part of it was personnel, that was an issue with that transition in Wisconsin and transitioning to a completely different offense. But he's a guy who came out and ran a super fast 40 at the Wisconsin Pro Day that surprised a lot of people. So, I'm not saying he could be that Derek King backup role that was really missing and really lacking in DC this year, that offensive spark. But I could see him in that kind of role where they have packages for him as a backup in DC.
Coach Greg here says, fun fact, Kurt Warner coached Slovis in high school. So just checking in here as well here. Anthony, thoughts for you for the defenders?
Yeah, I'll just add that I like what they did on the defensive line. Obviously this week they lost their top pass rusher and Malik Fisher, who signed with the Houston Texans. So Brady McGregor out of Michigan, and then Leonard Taylor out of Miami. Taylor's 305 pounds, big dude, can really have a great ability of stopping the run in the middle. So I like what DC did there. And then McGregor is quick on the outside of Michigan on the edge. Again, this is Michigan's defense was super talented last year on their run to the national title. So I maybe didn't get as many looks as if he would like, but I think he's a guy that can maybe step in and develop and be a nice replacement for Fisher. So I like what DC did on the defensive line and defense in general. I thought they drafted really well.
And we talked about that, the signings that Greg had mentioned earlier on, only 14 here coming, and that was the one this week. Like, Greg, is it just we've been doing these spring leagues now for 4 years? There's just not enough spots. And then Mike talks about that a lot. Mike Mitchell kind of in our group chat. Like, thoughts on that, just in terms of just to kind of take a break here for 2 seconds, just about kind of the signings coming from the UFL?
I think really more so than anything else, it's the time of year. Right. If you look at the transactions in the NFL, there really haven't been any for the last month because they're off. They're resting before training camp. There's no OTAs. There's no practices going on or anything like that. So GMs are taking a break, coaches are taking a break before the season begins. So I would really expect that number to go up here as we get into training camp. But, that's part of the argument against playing the time of year that the UFL did and kicking off the time of year it did, is because you may get a couple signings at the very end of the year where teams are completing OTAs and things like that. But there's going to be a long gap where there's just no transactions in the league, period, because this is the break time, the dead zone before training camp begins. So I think that's more of the case than any kind of spring league fatigue in terms of the NFL trying to sign these players.
Evan, thoughts on that, or else we can transition to the Roughnecks? Where do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's accurate what Greg said. The timeline, might be something, to consider next year, depending on how many signings. Like, we're going to have to wait, a couple months. We're playing the waiting game now to see how many guys are going to sign, during the NFL cycle, which, really goes all the way through, I guess, December, January, the regular season. So it's just a wait and see. But no, I agree with Greg.
Evan, standouts here from the Roughnecks as we continue on?
Yeah, I had 2 Roughnecks players, and I already pointed out that their draft was interesting because 8 of their 10 guys were not under contract by NFL teams. So I'm going to focus on 2 of those guys of the 8. The first guy is Trey Fluin. I think that's how you pronounce his name, safety for Middle Tennessee. He transferred up from FCS Houston Christian. He's also from the Houston area, so I thought that kind of added a nice tie into the pick. But anyways, his production was down a bit in 2023 compared to 2022. He had over 100 tackles in 2022 from the safety spot, which I thought was impressive. 5 combined interceptions and 16 combined passes defended over the previous 2 seasons. The biggest thing with him is he tore his ACL towards the end of the season in November. I think it was against Florida International. And I know that's what hindered his NFL interest. I'm sure he would have been in an NFL minicamp had he not suffered an injury, but that could work to the Roughnecks' advantage. You got a very talented player who was going to be in the NFL, but because of the injury and the rehab process was not able to attend such events like mini camps, training camps, whatever, and therefore he wasn't going to be signed. So I like that. And then the second guy, Malik Dunlap, the DB from Texas Tech, later round pick, I think at round 9. This is, to me, more of like a diamond in the rough pick. Another selection that people aren't going to talk about as much. He recorded 23 combined passes defended between 2022 and 2023 seasons. Super great size, 6'3", 220, so pretty intimidating from a frame perspective. And then this is kind of just a tie-in, but he played in the same secondary as a guy, Dadrian Taylor Demerson, who was drafted by the Arizona Cardinals in the 4th round. And that was a guy who initially stood out to me as another underrated DB during this process. So the fact that you're getting one of his teammates who played at the same school, played at the same system, that could work to their benefit as well, because I thought he was an interesting player.
Let's go to Anthony, and I should have mentioned off the top, I didn't want to cut off Evan. Obviously, the Roughnecks, a new GM here, Will Lewis, coming in here. Curious, Anthony's thoughts on that, how it would relate to their draft, and then standout players. And I'm going to go get some water, so I'm going to mute myself. But Anthony, thoughts on that, and then thoughts on the draft itself, and I'll be right back.
Yeah, I think the Roughnecks needed to make a change on the front office, and honestly, they probably need to make a change at head coach too. I know we've talked about this multiple times that CJ Johnson just didn't get the job done this year. So I'd be interested to see if they still make a coaching change. But this is a 3rd different GM in the last 3 years for the Houston Roughnecks. So there's probably more moves that are going to be made. Even if CJ Johnson ends up coming back, they're going to have to do some work on that coaching staff because they just didn't get the job done. Do you look at the offense coordinator Eric Price and do you make a change there? Did Price do what he needed to do to get that offense rolling? I don't know. I think this was an offense that really struggled. I think the quarterback position, I'm really surprised that the Roughnecks didn't go after a quarterback in this draft. I would have liked to have seen them get somebody that they could develop. I think they have a good group of quarterbacks right now, but none of them really stood out as, guys that can be stars in this league. I think Nolan Henderson had some nice moments. Reed Sinnett's a veteran quarterback. Jared Garantano, maybe could develop. I think they were hoping that he would be that, prototypical quarterback that could be the guy, but he couldn't stay healthy. So there's a lot of instability at the quarterback position, so I wish they would have done something there. I would say the one player that stood out to me was Malcolm Epps with Pittsburgh. This is a guy that he's bounced around a little bit in college. He was actually a wide receiver at one point, but I like the upside ability that he has. 6'6", 244 pounds. He's a tall guy, athletic. I think he can make some plays on this offense. Tight end position was a pun not intended, but a little rough for the Roughnecks. I know they had some injury issues there, so it looks like they made a couple moves at the tight end position to add some depth. So I really like Malcolm, and I think he's somebody that can, again, he played wide receiver at Texas. So he's an athletic guy, and I think he could really make a difference if he can just, maybe just develop a little more in his blocking. I think he could. He could move up in this Roughnecks depth chart and maybe be a starting tight end, and could be a top pass catcher, somebody like a Sal Cannella.
Same question to Greg. Just thoughts on the Roughnecks draft.
Definitely different than all the other teams. And they took two players, the only two players in the draft who did not participate in rookie minicamp, either as a tryout player or an undrafted free agent in the NFL. Evan talked about Trey Fluellen out of Middle Tennessee State. He's got an excuse, tore his ACL in November. But the other one was Xavier Benson out of Oklahoma State. Started 27 games the last two seasons, fifth leading tackler on the team this past year. So, it's not like they're taking a guy who wasn't invited to rookie minicamp because he was a backup and hardly saw the field. I mean, Benson's going to be an intriguing guy to look out for, and could be a guy who ends up in the UFL if he doesn't even have any interest in the NFL coming out in May. The other guy I want to spotlight is Jorquarius Spivey, their last pick in the draft. Kind of funny that Houston would take two tight ends. Anthony talked about Malcolm Epps, but they didn't feature the tight end, at least in the passing game, very often. So interesting that they take two tight ends here. Spivey actually had to sit out in 2023. He started at Mississippi State, transferred to TCU, tried to transfer back to Mississippi State in 2023, but just before the season opener, he was told by the NCAA that he was ineligible for the season. So he ended up working out at Mississippi State's Pro Day, ran a 4.62 40, and has actually tried out for 3 NFL teams this spring. He was in 2 rookie minicamps and also tried out at one of the veteran minicamps. So there's some NFL interest, even though he is, I believe, unsigned right now. But he's got an interesting background of the guys that they drafted.
God bless Greg for the pronunciation guide here going into this, because I saw some of these, and the worst is when we do it live. It's like, what's going on here? So good for that. All right,
I'll never forget. I'll never forget you furrowing your brow over Diego Fajot out of when he was in the XFL 2022 draft, and I tried to hop in and save you on that one.
And I think he's with the CFL now, right? Evan would know that. I think he moved up north. Here, let's go, Evan. Showboats here. We'll go around. I think this is a good pace here. We'll get through the teams here, and then we can do final thoughts. But Evan, we talked Jason Bean and all of that, but any other thoughts on the Showboats draft?
Yeah, this is fun. The Showboats might have had my favorite pick in the entire draft, and that's this guy, Jalen Coker from Holy Cross. Great combination of size and production. They have him listed at 6'3", 213 pounds. Had 59 catches for 1,040 yards and 15 TDs. So to crunch the numbers there, he was averaging about 17.6 yards per catch and had a score every 3.9 catches. So, if you round up, that's a touchdown every 4 catches, or every 4 times he's touching the ball, which is ridiculous. I don't care what level that's at. Holy Cross is an FCS program. Those numbers are just incredible. He's currently signed with the Carolina Panthers. He's a guy that I would like to see, in the NFL, maybe break through and get an opportunity. He's got an uphill battle, but obviously Carolina is one of the teams, they were at the bottom of the NFL last year, so he might have, some benefit of the doubt. But that was probably my favorite pick of the draft. The other guy that I'll talk about, and this is a guy that I've had, some history with too, just from the scouting perspective, McCallan Castles, the tight end out of Tennessee. He was one of the best tight ends at the FCS level at UC Davis, and then moved into SEC competition last year for his final year. Incredibly versatile player. He was blocking more last year, but he doesn't have a problem catching. Caught 5 touchdowns on just 22 receptions in 2023, and then he landed with the Philadelphia Eagles, Anthony's team, as an undrafted free agent this year. So I don't know. That's a guy that I could see, sticking around on an NFL practice squad too. But boy, if both those guys, Jalen Coker and McCallan Castles, if they come to the UFL, that'd be pretty good for Memphis. We might talk about them. You throw Jason Bean in there, they might have the best draft class. I don't know.
Anthony, we've seen here, and Chris even has a comment, showboats, and we're talking, offensive line and kind of all that stuff, lack thereof. Thoughts on, you would have thought maybe they go a little bit more of that, but thoughts on the showboats draft here?
I actually like the Jason Bean draft pick. And look, they've been dealing with Case Cookus last year, and he's probably the most Statue of Liberty quarterback in this league. Like he is the terrible choice for this offensive line. And yeah, I mean, I wish they would have drafted offensive linemen, but Jason Bean can actually move around in the pocket, and that's somebody Memphis needed. They, Troy Williams was able to do a little bit more, but Troy Williams, I really, he's not really he shouldn't be a starting quarterback. Hate to say it. Bean could develop and be a starting quarterback, so that would be a lot of fun if he ends up getting into the UFL. I think he would have a real shot at starting for Memphis. I would say a couple of standouts. Blake Watson was really good at Memphis. He had a good career at Old Dominion. And then, had a nice run with Memphis last year. He's ran for 1,000 yards a couple times in the last 3 years. He's a versatile back, be able to catch out of the backfield. So I think he would be a good complement to Victor, who is more of a power back. So and obviously Watson's a hometown guy too, having gone to school there. So that was a really smart pick on their part. And then I got to give a shout out to the Ivy League pick there with Mason Tipton. He's the third all-time leading receiver at Yale. He was a first team all Ivy League last year, led the league in touchdowns with 10. I think he's a really solid receiver and somebody that I can see. I don't know if he would be on the outside. He may be more of a slot receiver, but I think he's somebody that can be sneaky and maybe help out with that Memphis offense.
Chris here has a question, Christopher. I thought Blake Watson was going to be the first overall pick. Thoughts on that? I mean, picking, I know we talked to Jason Bean and all that. I guess we'll go back to Anthony on that. Just that they would go with the quarterback, not the running back. I don't know, just in terms of getting players into the league. Are you surprised they went quarterback number one?
Oh, sorry. My coach. I would. Yeah, I guess I was a little bit surprised. I mean, we've all talked about it. I think there's other position needs that they had, and the biggest one being on the offensive line. But I mean, it's a sexy pick. I mean, it's one that's going to get people talking. So I don't blame them for going after another quarterback. Like I said, like Case Cookus is not a mobile quarterback. Like it's getting to the point now where I like Case Cookus. I think he has good traits. I just don't know if he's really fit for spring football anymore. He's been really on and off the last couple years, and I just don't know if I really see that kind of impact in him. And that Memphis offense, they moved the ball a little bit better with Troy Williams at quarterback than they did with Case Cookus. So maybe it makes sense to have Jason Bean as the draft pick, and if he ends up heading over to the UFL, I do think he could legitimately start for this team, and I think he would add a spark to the offense.
Greg, any thoughts on that, or else we'll move over to Michigan? Any other thoughts on? I think have we done the round on Memphis?
Not me yet. Okay.
So sorry. I'm trying to keep track here.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I know it's not easy. Just they had a lot of holes. They addressed almost every level of their offense and defense with at least one pick. Again, offensive line is something that I wish they would have concentrated a little more on. But then again, you wonder, is that a position they're going to look to fill with veterans instead of rookies? That might be the better play for a team like Memphis. I think the one thing they did is they got more dynamic on offense, which is something they needed. Jason Bean is an athletic quarterback. Blake Watson runs a 4.4 flat 40. You've got Mason Tipton, who runs a 4.34 40. McKellen Castles is a threat at tight end. So they added a lot of speed on offense, and I think that was key for them. And other than that, Andrew Rame, I like at center, but I thought they could have used a little more offensive line. Even if they're waiting to sign veterans to start, I think they even needed depth across the offensive line. They could have even considered drafting some high-level rookies to play as backups as well.
Well, and not that we want to. I mean, we've had this conversation, but yeah, couldn't you sign some of these players? And I'm just always confused of doing this draft when it's kind of in the USFL and we kind of have the difference of all that. Evan, do you want to talk? I guess any thoughts on that? We'll move to Panthers, but just can you sign? I just never understand the place of this as opposed besides getting publicity, but then we don't really publicize it. So we're doing this. I don't know. Any other thoughts on that? Why you wouldn't just sign these guys? And then I guess we can move on to the Panthers.
I mean, you're taking a gamble, you know? I mean, of course, I would prefer a draft where everybody was just eligible for this draft and not signed in a league like the NFL or the CFL. You just have street free agents. Again, I like how the Roughnecks prioritized that, and they only took, 2 chances on guys that were in the NFL, and the rest of their guys will be available to sign right now. I think that's a great approach. Not saying that's going to happen, but we'll transition into Michigan here because I've only got one Michigan player to talk about, so it'll be quick. That's their quarterback, Rocky Lombardi. This is an interesting one, former Michigan State player, so there's that tie-in. He saw his most playing time at Michigan State during their COVID season in 2020, and then he transferred to Northern Illinois, played 3 seasons there, 2021 through 2023. His best year there was probably his first year in 2021. I think he had 24 total touchdowns, 15 passing, 9 rushing. This is a guy I've actually seen throw in person before as well, not at an NIU game, but when he was training down in Florida with a couple of NFL or other NFL quarterbacks, including Michael Pratt from Tulane, who was drafted by the Green Bay Packers. Saw them throw down in Florida when I was there for a camp. So I've, seen him in person. It doesn't tremendously overwhelm me. Again, guy was taken in the 5th round, so you're probably looking at him. If he does come, of course, he's with the Bengals right now. If he does come in, he'd probably be a backup option. But, Michigan, they played a lot of different quarterbacks this year, so I think it doesn't hurt too much for them to, continue looking at depth and looking at options.
Just if anyone Evan and all you guys, and because I bring on everyone here because I don't know anything. I'm just a facilitator of all this, but let it not be lost here. And Evan, well, I think he, first year he threw 24. It's always incredible to me, the wealth of knowledge everybody has of this. And God forbid if anyone from the league, and I know we've got people moving on and everything else, but this was us on a Zoom call and what I mean? It just the work that went into this to get them the knowledge that everyone has. Imagine if you had a stack of these players on the list and kind of everything else to be able to dive into all this stuff. I just think to be able to elevate the coverage of this, I just think would be incredible because I think we do a great job with just us on webcams and sitting outside or sitting Evan's at home, whatever, everything else. But Anthony, thoughts on the Panthers here? Anything from you?
Yeah, I like their first choice, Julian Pearl from Illinois. I think last time Michigan drafted a tackle as their first pick with Jared Horse. I think it worked out really well for them. He ended up being their starting left tackle. And while I praise him, I think he's one of the most underrated offensive linemen in this league. I don't think a lot of people talk about it much, but when he was on the field for the Panthers, when he wasn't dealing with injuries, I mean, that dude was bullying people. So, can Julian come in and, if he does come into and end up playing for Michigan, can he come in and maybe be the right tackle? He's a guy that played left and right tackle at Illinois, and he was, I think 2 times he was on the All Big Ten honorable mention team. He's a really good pass blocker. I think he can come in and be a bully on that offensive line for Michigan with Horse. So Michigan was a really good running team. Obviously they ran through 5 million quarterbacks, but it didn't matter to them. They were always winning games, and I think a big part of that was because of the consistency of the running game. So offensive line was very apparent to be important to Michigan. I think they end up signing 3 guys. So that's, imperative to them to make sure they have a strong depth at the offensive line position, which I think was really a strong suit for this team.
I know Chris is going crazy in the chat, and I know Evan already talked about it, but Rocky Lombardi, I mean, really A+ football name here, I think, in terms of anyone else here. A lot of these phenomenal names today. Greg, thoughts on the Panthers?
One of the things that I wrote about in my By the Numbers column out today on UFLboard.com was something that I know, Reed, you have talked about, Mike Mitchell's talked about it either on the Markcast or on social media, but it's the idea that with the UFL and so many of these markets struggling to attract fans, why not do a draft in which you can claim local players, right?
And we've had to jump in. We've had a lot of even comments on here I haven't read talking about that, wishing that they would do that. So yes, you're absolutely correct.
Michigan kind of did that themselves here. They
a
took
little bit, yeah.
They took J.D. Duplain out of Michigan State. They took Brian Dooley out of Eastern Michigan, as Evan mentioned. Rocky Lombardi, former Michigan State player. Even Isaac Okwu, the defensive end, is as a undirected free agent of the Lions. So he's a local guy right now, anyway. So in terms of territorial selections, the UFL didn't do that here, but really, the teams kind of. We talked about Blake Watson from Memphis being drafted by the Showboats, and McClellan Castles out of Tennessee being drafted by the Showboats. Now, again, these players may never end up suiting up for these teams that are drafting them, but if you can get a story in the local newspaper about, hey, the Showboats drafted this hometown guy, it can't hurt.
I think it's a no-brainer, and I mean, it's something that doesn't cost a penny at all, and you just do it that way. I agree with you, Greg. When we're trying to get these, media people, if I'm in Michigan, if I'm in Birmingham, if I'm in whatever, I'm trying to figure out like what the heck do I talk about? Like, I mean, and yeah, like obviously you should dive deeper and do these other player interest stories, but it's a no-brainer in terms of like something that's just easy fruit to pick from that of like this is a story that we can run and talk about. Greg, anything else from that? We can transition on to who we got, the Brahmas next. Anything else?
No, I'll jump in with the Brahmas here. Yep. So again, they're a team that didn't draft a quarterback despite having some issues at quarterback at this point that revealed themselves in the championship game. So
now.
Could be a situation where they decide to wait out a veteran or something like that, add them in a future draft, add them in free agency. Maybe they end up being happy with what they have. Maybe they run with Quentin Dormady as a starter next year if they decide against Chase Garber. So a strong defense got stronger. Their first two picks are along the defensive line, Gabriel Murphy, whose brother Grayson also played for UCLA. Again, offensive line, Sincere Haynesworth center. They've got Alex Millette at center, one of the best centers in the league. So interesting that they take a center here. So it didn't feel so much to me like they were trying to fill holes necessarily on the team, other than, trying to get perhaps the best talent they could out there that fit their system. I mean, more so than any other team perhaps is, they have a particular fit that they look for, especially with offensive skill position players to fit into that AJ Smith run and shoot based offense. So that's what you're going to look at for those skill position players on offense.
Evan, thoughts for you on this? And obviously covering the Roughnecks back prior, and then now the Brahmas, and we've had all this Wade Phillips and everything, and AJ Smith and everything else. Curious, like, I don't even know how they approach this in terms of, I mean, I guess Wade's sticking around, right? We've had all these conversations about AJ Smith in the offseason, but curious your thoughts on this, just because I feel like the team obviously super well.
Yeah, well, here's a good story about one of their draft picks. One of the guys I was going to talk about anyways, Sincere Haynesworth, the offensive center from Tulane. Mark Lillibridge, who is the GM of the San Antonio Brahmas, his son Hudson Lillibridge was an offensive lineman at Tulane. I watched him play. And Sincere Haynesworth was one of his teammates. So I have a feeling that's why Sincere Haynesworth was the selection here, even though they already have Alex Millette, and Sincere Haynesworth is currently signed with the New Orleans Saints in the NFL. He stayed local. Hudson has since transferred over to Missouri State, which is in the FCS. But I thought that was a cool story because I, got up close and personal with Sincere Haynesworth when I was doing some scouting stuff at Tulane. Same game where I saw like John Reese Plumlee in the AAC Championship and a bunch of other guys, that have gone on to the NFL. The other guy I want to talk about with the Brahmas is Joshua Cephas, the wide receiver from UTSA. So they're bringing in, somebody who played, I guess, in the Alamo Dome, at UTSA. That's their facility, from my understanding. He's put up great numbers the past three college seasons, going back to 2021, improved every year at UTSA during his time there. He was there for 5 seasons, had, I think, 1,150 yards receiving last year. That was something like 15th best in the nation, if I'm not mistaken, at the FBS level. So he'll be kind of like a local fan favorite, obviously, if he plays in the UFL. Currently signed with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Again, a lot of NFL guys here. But he's a guy who, again, just really liked the progress that he's made. UTSA isn't the biggest school, But again, if he comes into this league, he'd be a great fit. And I think he'd be a great fit, not just for, again, the culture, but the offense that they run. We talked a lot about, scheme and kind of what they run. Like I look at LaDietrich Griffin from Mississippi State, prior to this season, Mike Leach, rest in peace, was the head coach at Mississippi State. And, A.J. Smith has gone on record talking about running the Mike Leach offense, which is a combination of air raid and run shoot concepts with the Brahmas. So, that's something to keep in mind as well.
Anthony Wilhop, do you hear on this?
Yeah, obviously defense was a focus for San Antonio. 7 out of the 10 picks were on the defensive side, so I'm sure that that ass kicking they took from Birmingham really.
Yeah, can we get offense? We need offense.
Yeah, but the defense wasn't able to stop the run and stuff like that. So I can see that Wade Phillips is a defensive-minded coach, and I know he wasn't one making the picks, but it was very clear they wanted to focus on defense. Gabriel Murphy's the guy that really stands out to me. That dude was a stud at UCLA. I mean, he was another guy that versatile, can play outside linebacker, can play on the defensive end. I think he had 8 sacks last year for the Bruins. So he's a guy that. I think he fits Wade Phillips' defense really well, and I think he's a guy that can come in and be an impactful player. I don't know if he'll be a starter because that front 7 is really good for San Antonio, but I think he can come in and be a guy that can step in and help out. So I like that pick with Murphy.
It's funny. Like, and I know they're known for defense, all that. It's like the Mariners. We just had the baseball drafts, and I think. Whatever they draft, 30 players, I think 27 of 30 was pitching for the Mariners. I understand we have good pitching, but if we get and I understand this different circumstance here with all this stuff, but it sure would be nice. Okay, Kaka, Battlehawks. Who wants to start here? I guess we'll go back. Greg, thoughts on the Battlehawks here?
We talked about Houston selecting mostly players who are not under contract to the NFL right now. St. Louis picked the second most. They picked 5 players who are not under contract to NFL teams right now and could conceivably sign with the UFL tomorrow if the UFL has contracts ready, which we don't know about. But that's a whole other situation. But Bradley Ashmore out of Vanderbilt is a guy I watched this year. I thought he was really impressive to me and could come in a backup role at least and develop for a year in St. Louis and again, starter ceiling. That's kind of what you look at for these guys in the rookie draft. They may not come in and start right away, but what's their ceiling? And I think some of these guys do have that ceiling to them. Whether they ever get there or not, who knows? But they have that ability. Cody Schrader, another local guy out of Missouri, running back, is very talented. St. Louis has some good running backs right now. They got Mateo Durant, who was hurt early. Would expect him back healthy this year. Jacob Sailors is now in the NFL with the New York Giants, so perhaps they're looking at needing to replace his production or at least a backup spot to Durant and Wayne Gallman this year. So Schrader could certainly do that and more. And then Siobhan Cordero. Talked about at the top of the show how I had to take a quarterback in my mock draft. They take a quarterback first round. I think that's going to surprise a lot of people. Doesn't really surprise me with AJ McCarron and the decision. He's on year to year, right? I mean, he could hang him up just as easily as he could come back in 2025. So you're going to start needing to develop young quarterbacks behind him. Manny Wilkins is not going to be the answer. Brandon Silvers, sorry, Reed, is not going to be the answer at quarterback to replace McCarron. So, you got to start compiling some bodies there, whether they're rookies like Cordero or players that you bring in that are a little more veteran. But that's a position that's kind of a sneaky need for them here in this draft.
Evan, thoughts?
Yeah, I've got 3 guys. I'll talk about Cody Schrader, too, the running back from Missouri. I mean, we talked about kind of fan favorite with Josh Cephas and UTSA and that connection. I think Cody Schrader, if he comes to this league, will be the ultimate fan favorite, just knowing, how big and deep the St. Louis fan base is. Great story, played at D2 Truman State, which is another school in Missouri. So he stayed local his entire football career, but wasn't always at, the big school, Mizzou. But when he did get up there, to the Power 5 level in the SEC, he did some great things. They were talking about him a ton last year. Again, his journey's been really well documented. He's currently under contract with the San Francisco 49ers. So we'll see what happens to him. That's a guy, I don't know if he's going to come or not, but kind of hoping that he does, again, because it would just add a great, we talk about storylines in this league. That would be a fantastic one. Jelani Baker, the wide receiver from Limestone. I know Cody Schrader, I talked about him playing D2. This was technically the only Division II player selected in the draft. Just the definition at that level, at least, of being a number one option, 75 catches, 1,089 yards, 14 touchdowns last year. Again, made about a 500-yard jump from the season before. I think he could come to this league just because, maybe not just because, again, it was a highly productive receiver. He's got the ideal size you'd want, just under 200 pounds, I think, 6'1", 6'2". But he did well in kick returns last year. And I know, again, it's at the Division II level, so maybe you take that with a grain of salt. But you could see this guy getting worked in on special teams, just kind of like a guy, Joan Manigo, who was a D3 guy who had to play in Mexico before he came to the UFL this season with Arlington, kind of worked his way up. Again, you look for those things, right? So there's Jelani Baker. He was signed by the Baltimore Ravens as a UDFA. Don't know if he's still with them or not, but I know he did have an NFL contract. And then the last guy I'll talk about is another receiver that they took, Jaden Jonke, I think is how you pronounce his last name. Jonke, something like that. Anyway, again, another South Dakota State guy. I talked about Garrett Greenfield. I think Isaiah Stallbird was the other one, and then Jaden here. He was slightly more productive in 2023 than his twin brother Jackson. Again, that's another well-documented story. If you watch FCS football, he has a twin brother that plays on the same team. They play the same position. They were both undrafted in the NFL and both signed with the Houston Texans, so they've stuck together. Would be interesting to see, maybe if Jaden comes to the UFL with St. Louis, maybe they bring his brother with them, and I know that's not he wasn't drafted, obviously, but again, just down the line, if he chooses to do so. He was, again, slightly more productive than him last year, fell just short of a 1,000-yard season, but had double-digit touchdowns for the first time in his career at South Dakota State, which he was there for 5 years, I think. And then, like I said, signed by the Houston Texans as a UDFA. So, again, St. Louis just had a lot of, cool story type of guys. And I always like that. I think that's a good kind of way to round things out because this is the last team that we're talking about. But again, like Greg was saying, 5 guys that aren't under contract with the NFL. So in terms of, players potentially, suiting up in 2025, St. Louis might have a higher chance or a higher success rate, I should say, with this draft compared to other teams because of that.
Final thoughts here on this team, Anthony, and then we'll do a final go-home question, then we'll get out of here. I appreciate everyone's time.
Yeah, so Cordero, I think of the tape that I watched from quarterbacks that were drafted today, like looking at him, Cordero's was the most fun to watch. And I think he's somebody that he's the quarterback that I think St. Louis was hoping Manny Wilkins would have been. Because I think after watching Manny start this year, I think there are legitimate concerns about that backup quarterback position. So I thought it was a really smart move to get Cordero. He's the all-time leading passer in the Mountain West. But the one really good thing about Cordero is the last couple of years, he's improved his efficiency and like protecting the football. His turnovers cut down. He was making better decisions. And I think that's a really big deal when it comes down to the Battlehawks, because that's a really big thing with AJ McCarron is that he protects the ball well, but Wilkins turned the ball over a few times, so they need a quarterback in there who is mobile. Cordero is super fast when he's in the open fields. He's a lot like Plumlee, so I think he's a guy that can come in, and I think he can, if AJ McCarron doesn't come back, I think Cordero can compete for the starting job. And then Cody Schrader, obviously, is a big name here. He was a Doak Walker finalist last year. Dude is quick. He can do a lot of things in the offense, and I think he could be somebody that maybe they were hoping Max Borghi would be. I think there's a little versatility to him, and Schrader. It's kind of similar to the Memphis Showboats pick with Blake Watson, and getting a guy that is local, that can get a local name in there. And Schrader is a massive name with the Missouri Tigers, so he's a guy that I think can definitely start and be a really good replacement for Jacob Slaters.
Well, this is good. 8 teams here moving through. I think we did pretty good brisk pace. I appreciate it. A deep dive on all those. Let's go around before we get out. Greg, I know this is, we've talked about the top and kind of different circumstances for this, but who do you feel highest on in terms of what they did today of these 8 teams in terms of like, this was a smart way to approach the draft before we get out of here? We'll go around.
Well, I mean, really, Houston and St. Louis are the only ones that approach the draft differently than anybody else. So, you know, we won't know the results of that approach until January, February, when training camp opens, and we can count how many players from this draft are in each team's camp. But I think this is the first time the UFL is holding a draft of this nature, where undrafted free agents under contract to the NFL are available to be drafted.
Yeah.
So I think everybody's kind of flying blind a little bit here and kind of feeling around in the dark and really not sure how to approach this. I think next year, when we can actually look at this list and say, gee, 0 players from this team are in the UFL, I think you may see GMs then next year sort of adjust their game plan off of that. But I think at this point, taking best players available, doing that sort of thing, I can't really fault them for doing that. Just taking flyers on these guys is really what they're doing. And unfortunately, they're kind of hoping the guys that they drafted are not good enough for the NFL, which is kind of a weird thing to hope if you're a general manager taking these players, but you really do want them. I do wonder what kind of communication, if any, there were with GMs and agents. I know you asked Evan earlier, how would you approach this draft from a personnel standpoint? If I'm a GM and I know that there's a lot on the plate of these UFL GMs, they're responsible for sifting through all 12,000 of these players basically on their own, unless they get help from their coaching staffs, which they're probably not going to get because they're no longer under contract. But I'd be reaching out to agents of these players that I have on my draft board, and I'd be saying, hey, you're Blake Watson's agent. Is there any chance that this guy could consider the UFL if the NFL doesn't work out? And if they say flat no, he's off my draft board. Like, I'm not going to bother drafting him if his agent is telling me, look, I've talked to him. We're not interested in that option. So I'd be reaching out to agents and saying, hey, if I draft your guy, is there any possibility that he might come and play in the UFL? Because otherwise you're really throwing darts here in a lot of ways. You're taking guys who may be scheme fits, but you don't really have any idea if they're even interested in the UFL. And that's a very difficult proposition to be tasked with for these GMs.
Well, and I think that's a perfect segue to talk to Evan, because, and I know that you and Sam and we talk a lot in our group chat about, the arena and the IFL and like, how do you get these players? And, it's the same thing here. Like, we got the NFL. Okay. You go to the UFL, you're doing that same kind of convincing role, whatever. So I guess segue off of Greg's comments, but then kind of just, what I initially brought up, but I'm curious your thoughts on that too, because I think it's interesting.
Yeah, well, Greg's spot on. I mean, my number one thing, when you're initially contacting a player you're interested, you got to gauge the level of interest. Like, hey, would you actually come and play in our league and be interested in signing a contract? Because there's a good number of guys, especially guys that have touched the NFL, that are still clinging on to that hope of making a roster or getting a camp invite or whatever. They're not going to do it. They're like, well, I don't want to do this. My focus is on the NFL, or again, like we're talking about here, maybe UFL. I've heard some things about that. I always say player education is important, having guys understand what options there are out there, how much money, you make, schedules, things like that. There's a lot that goes into it. But yeah, I mean, like Greg said, it's a lot easier to kind of trim down this giant pool of thousands of players if you just find the guys you're really interested in and then get in contact with them or their agent and be like, hey, would you actually consider doing this? And if half of them say no, well, then you've chopped that in half so you can be way more condensed and more precise, I guess, in your process. But to answer your original question, Reed, I mean, in terms of, who I thought had, the best or most productive draft, for me, it's between Memphis and DC. Again, DC, just because I love, Von Hutchins' approach, what he does. I know he has a lot of connections. He's very vocal and open and honest about, what they're doing from a personnel standpoint, which I appreciate. And then Memphis just had a lot of flashy guys. Again, not saying that those guys are going to come play. It's not a guarantee, but you like the upside there. And then, I look at like the Roughnecks and the Battlehawks, like Greg and the rest of us have already talked about, taking guys, that aren't under contract with the NFL, which means that they have a higher chance of coming into the league. But again, maybe that doesn't work out. And maybe, the guys that Houston brings in just aren't talented enough to make the cut, because they were overlooked in the NFL. And usually that's for a reason. A lot of times, NFL personnel people, they don't get things wrong. The scouts, the GMs. I mean, you hear about, some of the more highly publicized stuff like a Johnny Manziel situation or something. But with a lot of the, smaller, more intricate things when it comes to scouting, they don't miss on a lot of players. Like the guys that, should be in the NFL are in the NFL, and they're there for good reasons. So I'll leave it at that.
Anthony, take us home here. Yeah, it is like Greg said, it's kind of like inviting. Hey, if your date to the dance doesn't work out, then like I'm standing by here. It really feels like that a little bit here. Anthony, final thoughts on kind of what team you like the approach to today?
Yeah, so I like what Memphis and St. Louis did offensively. I thought they had the strongest drafts on the offensive side. Really like what San Antonio did on the defensive side of things. I would say if they can make any changes to this college rookie draft, they should separate into two. Like they should do one in the summer where whoever is available, like actually available and not under contract with the NFL, like have them be available for it, and then do a second one when cuts are made and stuff like that. I know that's typically what they did with the veterans, but maybe you do one with just rookies that were cut by teams, by NFL teams, or are still available, and you can put them in a pool, and then if you need to do a third one, do a third one. I mean, these spring leagues typically love doing, like 3 to 5 drafts in the off season because one, it is a publicity, which I know, Reed, you don't think it is, but I think it's kind of publicity for the league.
I think it can be.
I mean, you did a whole show off of it, so I mean, it's counting for something. So, but I think it's good to have any way that the league can generate some kind of news. I think is always good. So, I think the more drafts, the better. I mean, throw in as many as you want because I do think you're opening up opportunities for players to get a chance to be signed, and these are leagues that can use as many players as possible to fill up rosters before going into training camp. So, try to get as much talent as you can.
I agree. I think, and like Greg said, presumably more drafts to come here, Riot, and we have the showcases. We're not doing the combine this year, right? We're doing the showcases, presumably that, and then we'll have another draft, right, early fall, and then maybe one after kind of the end of the NFL season going into training camp. It's just hard because I get, like Anthony said, doing the publicity. We want to do this. We want it to be a thing, but most of the stories that come out today are players that were like, well, I didn't even know I was in this or what's going on. And so like, I think there's ways to do this. I've given the work that I feel that this does at this point because I could bring on 87 people to talk about football stuff, and I think there's a ceiling to kind of the interest for this. I think we did a phenomenal job today. I appreciate all 3 people coming on. I know Pat wanted to hop on as well. I know Pat's busy with work stuff, and then Andy Murray, the professor, wanted to hop on as well, just circumstances and stuff. So I appreciate everyone coming on. Like I said, like and subscribe. If you're finding this now, I don't know if we are. We're still working through all this. I would like to get more of a picture of what we want this UFL offseason to look like. I know that Jeff and Anthony had his article out. Jeff, the VP of comms, stepping down, mutually parting ways with the league. I've had my own kind of issues with the league, and maybe we'll leave that be discussion for another point, but I haven't been super motivated to kind of figure out like, okay, what is the plan here? Are we having more drafts? We had Russ Giglio on last season kind of talking about it. I thought that was a fruitful conversation, but we're all here where we are now. So like and subscribe. I talked on the Monday show. Husky and I are taking a 2-week break. I got vacations here. We're going to the lake. We're going to Boston. We'll be back. If there's any breaking news, I'm sure I'll have my laptop. Greg, anything you want to plug? UFL board? We'll do that real quick and we'll get out because I know it's late for everyone.
Yeah, a lot of content coming to UFL board. I had my by the numbers, looking at kind of a macro look at the draft today. I'll have more micro looks at each team, comments on each player over the next few days. Those will be split up by USFL conference, XFL conference. Take a look at, analyze what each team did. And then next week, I've been compiling throughout the last week or so players who've participated in the UFL showcases in St. Louis and DC last weekend. So I'm going to have a couple pieces out that profile, do short little bios on the players that I was able to find, scouring social media to find out who attended these, since the league is not releasing those names. And it's probably going to be the most comprehensive list that's going to be out there of players who attended the UFL showcases. So be on the lookout for that next week.
And I mean, just for crying out loud, like I understand Greg last year when it's like, we don't want to release the names because we got to deal with the USFL and all that stuff. Like, put the names out there, right? Like, if you're the UFL at this point, put the names out there. What are we hiding? Evan, are you guys winning an IFL championship? What do we got here before we get out of here?
I sure hope so, man. You know, just clinched playoffs and we got our last regular season game this weekend. So always looking around. You know, I do plan to go to the UFL showcases in Orlando, hopefully, and San Diego, which are, I think, September and October. That's in my schedule, or I'm working it in. So, you know, always looking around, always happy to talk football, always happy to talk players. That's obviously my thing, my bread and butter. So yeah, you know, had a good time, and like you said, hopefully, you know, we come out as champions.
Everyone's here. Happy happy words. Anthony, hardest working man, and for the all football news stuff right now. What do you got coming out, and then we'll get out of here.
Yeah, so obviously CFL season is hot and heavy, so that's kind of where our big focus is at. Thank God this draft happened, so now I can do some UFL breakdown. So I know Mike just finished up his DC Defenders one, so hopefully they'll come out probably tomorrow, and then I'll do the breakdown on the rest of the teams, and then there's going to be a lot of CFL content. It's going to be busy this weekend with two games on. I guess Friday. There's no games tomorrow, so it's just going to be 2 games on Friday, 1 on Saturday and Sunday. So a lot of preview games, and then tomorrow probably do some. I want to do a breakdown of what's going on in Edmonton and all that jazz with the quarterback position and stuff. So be on the lookout for that.
Yeah, I saw Arash Madani tweet out, a friend of me of the show, and he's like, there's no sports right now. What's the CFL doing? I'm like, UFL College Draft, bro. Like, wake up. Like, we're going. Yeah, if you're, God forbid, if you're, we got a lot of people still on this hour and 35 minutes. And if you're like into this, CFL season's been great. Like, and I know, and it's your mileage may vary, but it's been a phenomenal CFL season. BC, #1 in the West. We're going to be hosting the Grey Cup. Should be excited. Appreciate everyone. Evan, Greg, Anthony, thank you guys all so much. I'm going to go get some dinner here. Well, I'm going to shower after working there. Then we'll go get some dinner. I appreciate everyone. Enjoy the new outro graphics. So we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.